Hi everybody. I'd like to share a few thoughts on article use. Now this is an area of English grammar that people sometimes have trouble with. They often have questions. Luckily, article mistakes don't usually lead to a communication breakdown, but always better to do things right when we can. So here are a few thoughts on article use. Now the first thing we need to keep in mind is, of course, articles are attached to nouns, or strictly speaking, noun phrases. We can say a dog, we can say a big dog, we can say an extremely big and beautiful dog, but it's all about nouns, and we have to think, what are the main types of nouns? Well, there are two. There are uncountable and countable nouns. Countable nouns also break down into singular and plural, and once we've broken them down like this, it's time to decide what are our article choices. Well, with uncountable nouns, we can have no article, what's sometimes called the zero article, or we can have the. With singular nouns, we can have a or an or the, and with plurals, we can have nothing or the. So as you'll notice, this word the can be used with all types of nouns, and in fact, the word the, of all the words in the English language, the most common word is the. And what does it do? Well, it's a word that helps to specify which whatever we're talking about. So you can consider it like a short form of this or that or these or those. And it suggests that we're limiting or specifying the noun. Maybe because there is only one of that thing, the moon. Maybe there's only one thing in our context. So I'm taking tennis lessons. The teacher is very patient. In other words, that teacher, the one who's teaching me tennis. And sometimes both the listener and the speaker, or the reader and the writer, we both already know which one we're talking about. I saw the crazy guy yesterday. We already talked about this person before, so we know who we mean when we talk about the crazy guy. Now, if we compare what happens when we use an article and when we don't, I like Macau, but I don't like the food. Well, what does that mean? It means I don't like the food in Macau. I don't like Macanese food. But if I say I like Macau, but I don't like food, what does that mean? Well, it probably means I'm very, very thin, because it means I don't like any food at all. I am a disliker of all food. And so if the answer to the question, well, which pollution are you talking about? Which communication? Which stress? Which exams? If the answer is, well, any, all, doesn't matter, or what are you talking about? Then what that tells us is we're probably not going to be using an article. We're not going to be using the. And when we want to express all, any, every, doesn't matter which, generally we use what's called the zero article. In other words, no article at all. Sleeping is great. Which sleeping? Well, all sleeping, anytime, any place. Football is very popular. Which football? Just football. We don't need to specify. Lions are stronger than sheep. Which lions? Which sheep? Well, all of them. Okay. And as you can see, we have a choice of using no article, either with uncountables or with plurals. And the distinction between countable and uncountable is not 100% simple. Many nouns can be used either countably or uncountably. For example, I prefer tea to coffee, but I can use coffee as a plural when I'm talking about 3 cups of coffee, saying to the waiter in the restaurant, can we have 3 coffees, please? There are some words that are always uncountable, so you should keep these in mind. For example, music, we don't talk about musics. Happiness, we don't talk about happinesses. Advice, information, furniture, luggage, electricity, staff, when we're talking about all the people who work at a company. We don't say there are 6 staffs. We would have to say there are 6 staff members. And as we've seen, countable and plural nouns can be used with no article. but singular nouns get lonely. They need an article or another type of what's called a determiner. So for example, with singular, we need the, or we need a, or an, or another type of word. For example, a possessive. We can have a pet, we can have my pet, we can have Jane's pet, but we can't just say pet. Now, what's the difference between the and a or an? Well, as we saw before, the is a word that specifies and limits. Okay? So a or an means one, but we're not specifying which one. So for example, we can say, after I graduate, I hope to get a good job. Well, which job? We don't know yet. It doesn't matter, but one good job. But on the other hand, I can say, the job I had last summer, very specific job, was interesting, but the pay was low. In other words, the pay that went with that job. Now, another related question is, how do we decide between a and an? Well, some teachers, some books, some websites will tell you that it's about spelling. That's not really true, though. Actually, it's based on pronunciation. So we will say a university. Okay, the spelling is with a U at the beginning, but the pronunciation is a Y sound. So like we would say a yellow car, we will say a university. We'll also say an honest person, because the H is silent, and so the sound is a vowel sound at the beginning of honest. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more about articles, please go to the Language Center's English Language Support Services, ELSS, online resources, and under Grammar, you can find more information on nouns and articles. So thanks for listening, and happy learning.